everyone, here Dr. Zahid Ansari, Professor Department of Computer Science, PA College of Engineering, Bangalore, India. In this video, I am going to discuss about inter-thread communication in Java multithreading with the help of an example. In inter-thread communication, we rely on three methods in the object class. These methods are method wait, method notify, and method notify all. All these three methods must be called from within a synchronized context. And we have discussed in our previous video what is synchronized context. Synchronized context can be a synchronized method or a synchronized block. So, first we will see what is wait method. The wait method, it tells the calling thread to give up the monitor. Since the thread is in the synchronized context, it means it has acquired the monitor. And when it calls wait, so it gives up the monitor and goes to sleep. It sleeps till when? It sleeps until some other thread enters the same monitor and calls the notify. Then this thread wakes up. Then the second method, notify. Method notify, it wakes up when it is called. It wakes up the first thread that called the wait on the same object. Similarly, there is a method notify all. It wakes up all the threads that called wait on the same object. So, all the threads who were waiting for the same object or for the same monitor, the highest priority thread will run first. Okay. So, these methods, they are used for inter-thread communication. Why inter-thread communication is required? Why it is necessary? That we'll see with one example in the next slide. Okay. So, we'll be considering the queuing problem. Consider the classic queuing problem where one thread called producer is producing some data and another thread called consumer is consuming this data. So, producer thread is producing data and consumer thread is consuming the data, right? Producer is producing the data continuously and consumer is consuming those data continuously. So the condition is this, requirement is this, the producer should not overrun the consumer with data. Meaning is, producer should not produce the data such a fast that the consumer has not consumed that and the producer has overrun it. Similarly, consumer should not consume the same data many times. Consumer should not be could not consume with such a speed that the producer has not produced the data and the same data the consumer is consuming multiple times. Okay. So for this, we'll consider two solutions. First is an incorrect solution in which we are using only synchronization. With just synchronization, we are trying to solve this problem, okay, without inter-thread communication, right? And then what problem we face, that we'll see with the help of an example. Then second, we'll see a correct solution which is using the synchronization also and inter-thread communication also. So we will be using wait and notify. Okay. So let's consider the example. Okay. So first we consider the incorrect solution. In this, first we define the queue class, the queue where we keep the data. So class queue with the variable n and method get and put. Both methods get and put, they are synchronized. The variable n is where the consumer puts the data, the producer puts the data and the consumer gets the data. So producer puts the data in N and consumer accesses the data from variable N. So we are defining the class Q. We are defining the variable N where the producer will produce the data and from where the consumer will consume the data. Okay. So for consumer to consume the data or for consumer to get the data, we are defining a synchronized method get. Okay. In which the consumer writes that the consumer got the N, the value of N, right? And this method, it returns the value what the consumer got. It returns N. Okay. Similarly, there is a method put over here which takes a parameter N, and this N it uses to set the value of the data member N over here. So this method put will be called by the producer thread. Producer will produce and it will put this value, right? So after setting the value N, the producer will print put and whatever is the value of N. Okay. So I hope the things are clear that we have a class Q which has a data member N where the data is kept. There are two methods, get method to be used by the consumer thread and consumer prints got N and it returns the value of N. And there is a method put which is called by the producer thread and this method is used to set the new data value to N, right? Now what is our requirement is once the producer puts the data, then consumer should get the data. It should not happen that the producer puts the data multiple times so that producer has put a data and before the consumer has consumed, producer is again putting the data so that value is lost. So producer is overrunning the values. So and consumer is not able to consume all those values, right? This should not happen. Similarly, this also should not happen that the consumer is very fast in getting the value of N. So producer has not produced a new value and the same value the consumer has consumed multiple times. Okay. So this also should not happen. So let's see what happens in this example. Okay. So we see now we implement the producer thread. Okay. So we are defining class producer and we want to make it thread, so we implement runnable. Okay. So producer is a thread class. Producer uses a queue. This queue is shared between producer and consumer. Okay. So it has a data member queue of type queue, right? Producer defines a constructor in which it takes a queue object as a parameter and that queue it uses to initialize the data member queue over here. Then a new thread is created by passing this pointer. We give the name producer to it and the thread is started. Okay. And as we have discussed earlier, as the thread is started, basically the run method is called. In run method, what the producer is doing, it is initializing the value of I to 0 and in an infinite loop, it keeps producing the value. So it keeps calling on the queue object, it is calling the method put continuously in a while loop, right? And what it does is it passes the value starting from 0, right? And in next time it will put the value 1, then value 2, 3, 4 continuously. like this. So this is producer thread which produces the value continuously. Next we'll see the consumer thread. So the consumer thread, it keeps consuming the entries in the queue. Okay, so we implement the consumer thread class by implementing runnable. Okay, the consumer also has a data member queue. Okay, this is the queue from which the consumer consumes. Okay, so the consumer constructor, it takes a parameter, an object of type queue. Okay, and that it uses to initialize its a data member queue. Okay, then we create the consumer thread by instantiating thread. We pass this reference, we give the name as consumer thread, and we start the thread. As soon as the thread starts, it invokes the run method. And in run method, what the consumer thread is doing, it is continuously calling the get method of the queue, basically. So this way, it will be calling it will be accessing the value of n associated with the queue. Okay, so the consumer thread, it continuously calls the queue.get. As we saw in the previous slide, the producer is continuously calling the put method, and it is putting the new value every time, right? In the variable n of the queue, and consumer is continuously getting those values. Okay. Now we have the driver class. Our class is producer consumer class PC. Right? It first creates a single queue instance queue. Okay. Then creates a producer and consumer thread that share this queue. So what we do is we first create the queue. So we created new queue. Okay. Then we are creating the producer thread and consumer thread. Okay. And the same queue we are passing to the producer and consumer. Okay. So just recall, when we create the producer thread, then what the producer will do? It will take the queue. So I am going to the producer class, right? What producer, if the producer thread is created, right? Its run method is called. And the producers start putting the value of I into n, into the queue, right? Where it calls the method put, right? If I go back to the queue's method put, what is done in put method? In put method, whatever is the value that is being passed, that value is used to set the data member n over here, right? And that value is printed over here. Okay. So the producer is continuously calling this method put with the values starting from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Now, after that we create the consumer thread, right? So again we pass the same queue over there. Okay. So what the consumer does? The consumer continuously calls the method get. Okay. So the consumer, when the consumer thread is created, right, its run method is called, and what consumer is doing? It is continuously calling the method get on the queue. And what happens in this method? So we go back to the queue class. In get method, right, what is done? In get method, the consumer, it prints got the value of n, and it returns that value. Okay. So we come back to the class. So continuously the producer is producing the value and consumer is consuming the value. Okay. If we run this, then we'll see what is the outcome of it. Okay. We'll see the output. Okay. So we are going to the NetBeans over here. Okay. So the same class PC. Okay. So here we are first declaring the class Q we are declaring with the method get and put. Then we are defining the producer thread. Then we are defining the consumer thread. Then after that the driver class PC, in which we are creating the queue. Then we are creating the producer thread and the consumer thread. We are passing the same queue to it. Okay. So if I run this, what is the output that we'll see, right? Okay. So I will run this, run file. Okay. See. So we see that both producer and consumer, they are continuously doing their job. The producer is continuously producing the value and the consumer is continuously consuming this, and they are in infinite loop, so they are doing it continuously. So I'm killing the program over here, stopping the program, and if we see the output right from the beginning, then we see that the producer put the value 0, and before that value got consumed, the producer has put the value 1 again. So producer was fast. It is overrunning the data before the consumer could consume it. So it has produced so many values which consumer could not consume, right? Then we see the consumer consumed the value 16 over here. And before the producer produced the next value, the consumer consumed the same value multiple times over here. So here the consumer is faster, right? It is consuming the same value multiple times, right? Similarly, producer produced many value here. Producer is faster. So like there is no proper communication between them. Although synchronization is there, at a time only either the put method is called or the get method is called. That synchronization is there, right? But still the output is not the way we want. Okay. So what should we do for this? That we'll see next. So we'll try to fix this queuing problem now. So for this, we have written another program in which we modify our queue. And in this, we are using the inter-thread communication between the producer and consumer. So we make use of the wait and notify methods, as well as we are using an additional variable called the value set in this. Okay. So let's say the queue class we have modified over here. In addition to the data member n, the queue class also has another data variable called value set. We initialize it to false. Meaning is that the producer has not set a new value over here. When value set is false, it means the value set is false when the producer has not produced a new value into it. Okay. So if we see in the get method, when the consumer thread it enters this method, at that time first it checks if the new value is set or not. Then if the new value is not set, so the producer will not consume the old value multiple times. It does not want to consume it. So what it does is it calls the method wait, and this makes the consumer thread to sleep. It will keep sleeping for this till it is invoked by the producer. Okay. Similarly, let's see the method put over here. In method put, which is called by the consumer thread. So consumer thread enters to it. Okay. After that, it checks about the value is set. If the new value is already set. So if the new value is already set, means value set is true. New value is already set. Then what it does is, the producer waits for the consumer to consume this value, and it will sleep. The consumer thread will be invoked by the consumer thread when the consumer thread consumes the value and the value set becomes false. Okay, so now let's go back to the get method again. Get method is called by the consumer thread. Okay. So the consumer thread will check if the new value is set or not. If value is not set, then it will sleep. Okay. When it will wake up, when the consumer will produce the new value and it will notify the consumer thread to wake up. When it wakes up, okay, since now the new value has been set by the producer and that's why it woke up, so it consumes the value and it prints gotten. Okay, and since it has got the value, what it will do is it will set the value set flag to false, that I have consumed it, so now the new value set it has become false. And the producer, which might be sleeping now, to produce the new value, because till now the consumer did not consume the value, so it will call notify. This will get up the producer thread which was sleeping while waiting to produce the new value. Okay. Similarly, in the put method, when the producer comes to it, it first checks whether the new value is set or not. If the new value is already set, then it waits for that value to be consumed. Okay. So it is sleeping. It will be invoked by the consumer thread. When the consumer calls notify over here, right, the producer, it is invoked over here. That consumer has consumed the value. So what the producer does, the new value, the value of n, it sets it over here, right? And after setting the value, it tells that I have set the new value. So it makes the value set flag to true. Okay, and it prints put the value, right? And now meanwhile, the consumer might be now waiting for the new value to be set, right? And for that it might be sleeping. So producer, it notifies. So if the consumer is sleeping while waiting for the new value to be produced, right, the consumer thread, it wakes up and then it starts consuming the value. Okay, so this change we make in the Q class. Like we are using, in addition to the synchronization, we are using inter-thread communication also. Rest, the producer thread is same, the consumer thread is same, and in our driver class we give the name PC fixed, right? It is also almost, it's also same. Here we are basically creating the queue, then we are creating the producer thread and the consumer thread. Okay, I'll run this now. Okay, so we run this. Okay, so now I'll stop so that we can analyze the output. Okay, so go to the beginning. See, the producer has produced the value 0 and consumer has consumed the value 0. Then the producer has produced the value 1 and the consumer has consumed the value 1. Then producer has produced 2. So 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5. See, now there is a proper communication between them and things got properly synchronized with the help of the inter-thread communication. So the methods wait and notify, they are used for this. So along with the synchronized block or synchronized method, inter-thread communication is required for the proper functioning of the things. Okay. So with this, we stop our demonstration.